Okay, good morning. And without further ado, we can get started. So, this is, I guess, the time that we have to talk about Shavuos, because by next week, Shavuos will be over. And there's always feeling when Shavuos ends, and you know that that's it. The next time you get to a holiday, you have to first pass through the 3 weeks, the 9 days, Tisha B'Av, and the Yom Noraim. So this is really, after Pesach, you really put in your time, and you get to enjoy Pesach, and after Pesach it's not really over. You have Lag BaOmer, you have Shavuos, it's kind of a slow landing. So you have to make the most of it. And Shavuos, of course, is the holiday with the least in terms. It has no icons. Right? You look at these clip art, right? To use a modern term. If you're in the old days, you used to have to draw things, or at least you have to buy stickers. Then you go on the computer and you look for clip art, which is the computer equivalent of stickers, like these little cartoon drawings that you can put. I would say paste, but kind of. It's clip art is like, if you have let's say the shul puts out a newsletter. So before they had all the fancy things that they have today, if you made a shul newsletter, you would have a little picture of like a menorah or a shofar, and you would notice that every other shul newsletter has the exact same picture of the menorah because they all went online and typed into Google menorah. They all got the same little, that's clip art. And but Shavuos doesn't have anything. Right? It's just there's no shofar, there's no sukkah, there's no matzah, there's no menorah, there's no megillah. There's a tablets, but right, tablets. There's cheesecake. There's a mountain. An idea which I believe has a basis for it, that Shavuos, in a certain sense, is the most abstract of all the holidays. If we can use that word. It's not that Shavuos has less stuff, but it's a less tangible holiday. And the idea, the Chafetz Chaim makes this point with about Torah in general. He says we say Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, right? We list the different mitzvahs, unique mitzvahs, the special qualities. And we say Talmud Torah, sort of above all or equal to all. And we say similar thing about sins, Lashon Hara Keneged Kulam. The sin of Lashon Hara is equal to all. And he explains that. I think he discusses this in more than one place. There's the idea of the spiritual body. We know that everything in the physical world symbolizes something more genuine and more spiritual in the upper world. And the body of a human being certainly is very holy, although it's physical, but it's the clothing for the soul, which is spiritual. And the rabbis talk about 248 limbs or organs of the body and the 365 sinews. That represents the 248 positive mitzvahs, the do's of the Torah, the 365 negative commandments, the don'ts, which together make up 613. The Chafetz Chaim says what that means basically is that to be a complete person, to be a complete human being in the next world, in the next life, we need to make sure every part of our body is healthy, and each mitzvah nourishes a different part of us. And he says if there's a mitzvah that involves, let's say, your fourth toe, nobody wants to be missing a toe, and you certainly wouldn't want to. Nobody would voluntarily cut corners on a mitzvah if they know that it will affect one of the toes. But obviously, there are some things that, if you're given a choice, he said, for example, in the physical world, Chazal tells us, reflected in halacha, that if someone injures another person, there are damage payments, and we calculate the value of a person. They would, in the old days when there was slave could be bought and sold, and you would figure out the value of this person. There was a monetary thing behind that, and depending on health. So the rabbis say that if a person damages another person's hearing and deafens them, they pay the entire value of the person, because hearing loss is just completely devalues the person's ability. Certainly before they have sign language, the person's inability to function. So a lot of times the speech and hearing, those are such fundamental aspects of being human. So we certainly wouldn't want to cut corners on mitzvahs that involve speech, mitzvahs that involve hearing. Those define who we are. The person can be in a wheelchair and still be a famous author or make great discoveries. They can even rule rule a kingdom even if they're physically incapacitated, as long as they have a mind and as long as they have the ability to communicate. But even beyond that, the Chavetz Chaim says the idea of speech is the defining characteristic of a human being, and we know that there's a famous observation that Targum Onkelos, the Aramaic translation of the Torah, which is usually word for word, verbatim, literal translation, in certain specific places where he either uses euphemisms or elaborates. And in the creation of man, when it says that man was created and became a living, had a life force, a living soul, he says a spirit which speaks. He puts the word speech as his translation of what it means that man receives a living soul, that the life essence of a human being, when man became man, it was through the power of speech that was most defining characteristic. So therefore, speech is a very spiritual, very fundamental aspect, not of the body but of the soul. Therefore, the Chavetz Chaim says, all mitzvahs are essential, but mitzvahs involve physical body or props, objects that we use. That's one thing. But mitzvahs or areos are purely spiritual, and they have nothing physical, much more potent, represent a much more powerful spiritual force. So Torah, on the one hand, a mitzvah that involves only speech, that's an entirely spiritual mitzvah. No physical props, nothing rooted in this world. And Lashon Hara, an entirely spiritual sin. So they're almost considered flip sides of each other. The Chacham talk about if a person sins, they should try to undo it with mitzvahs. So if they were ran to do sins, they should run to do mitzvahs. If they hurt people with their hands, they should help people with their hands. And if they spoke Lashon Hara, they should study Torah. That's like the opposite, because it's entirely spiritual. So when we talk about Shavuos, which celebrates the giving of the Torah, it makes sense that there's no props associated with it, because the Torah is a mitzvah with no props. It's only speech. And speech, I read this, I think maybe it was a Bester. We think of speech as also being physical. You use your mouth. As we know, Torah can be studied in the mind. The truth is that Lashon Hara, certainly hearing and believing Lashon Hara happens in the mind, but even speaking Lashon Hara, so someone makes this point, again, it might have been Rav Dessler, that what is speech? So we think of speech as the way you transmit ideas to another person, right? Whether it's physical speech or writing or even gestures, which the Chavetz Chaim says can also be considered Lashon Hara. Gestures, expressions, but really, if you think about what speech is and why speech is different, why speech is the human quality that animals don't have. Now, animals do communicate. They bark at each other. They sometimes long distances. Whales sing songs that you can hear from miles. So that the fact that they can make their intention known to others is not really what's unique about human beings. Animals, when they want to let you know something, they'll let you know. Dogs are very good at it, right? What's really unique about human beings is not that they communicate, but what it is that they're communicating. Because what speech really is, it's the ability to take the input, right, the idea, the things that you get from the world around you, and things that are inside yourself, and actually define them and put them into words. Right? A great author, or a great teacher, or a great scholar, we all have ideas. We go through life, we have experiences, we interact with people, we have thoughts and feelings, and a really wise person, I think about a great person with great understanding, people go to a great Chacham for advice. They have the ability to take your experience and to words and define, say, well, what you're experiencing is this, and take all the ideas and all the possibilities, and to find the right way to classify, to define, to reach the right conclusions. That's really what speech is. Which is why Lashon Hara, people point out, a lot of the sin of Lashon Hara, and not just, it's often not like Chavetz Chaim gives this example about Miriam. All the instances of Lashon Hara, the Torah could have chosen it specifically mentions Miriam as a lesson that we're supposed to learn from, which some people even say it's one of the mitzvahs of the Torah, although I don't think most people consider it one of the 613 mitzvahs, but the Torah definitely tells us to remember the story of Miriam. And the Chavetz Chaim says, when he tells over a story, a halachic observation, he says the inspirational value of the story of Miriam and the Chofetz Chaim says, based on Rambam, I think, is that there's so many extreme aspects of that story to look at what a great person Miriam was overall, and how much she really cared about Moshe, and how devoted she was to him, and how well-meaning he was, and how little Moshe would never take offense at anything because despite all this, all these details, she was still punished. But the Chofetz Chaim says there's also a halachic point. Miriam didn't actually say anything negative about Moshe. Two points. First of all, she didn't say anything negative. She simply, he says, what she basically said, that as a prophet, I think he's making a mistake because we're also prophets, and well, she basically, it was, why was it Lashon Hara? Because Hashem appears and says, well, Moshe is not a prophet like you. He's a different type of prophet. Meaning, there are all the other prophets, and there's Moshe. He's a category by himself. So she was supposed to know that. I guess she didn't, or she didn't realize it fully. That was it's like basically saying, if you said that Moshe Feite was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, and there was only one other person in his generation who was equal to him. He says, no, there was nobody who was equal to him. Like, that would be the equivalent, basically. Because Moshe was above everyone, and she didn't say he was above everyone. She thought he was like her and Aaron, so he said that was the problem. And but the point the Chofetz Chaim makes is that whatever you can say about Miriam, no one questions that her intention was she was well intentioned, and her statement was constructive. The problem was that she had this mistake in perception. So Chofetz Chaim says, if you make a mistake in perception, and therefore you say something which is Lashon Hara, even if according to you it's not Lashon Hara, but you're still guilty of Lashon Hara because you should have had better perception. So we call it Dam L'Kamschos. Right? Chofetz Chaim says that a lot of times the Lashon Hara takes place not in the words, because at that point, what I'm doing is correct if I'm right, but the problem is that I'm not right, and it's how we judge other people that's the problem. The idea that what is Lashon Hara really? So one can argue that Lashon Hara is not so much about communicating to others, although clearly it is, but Lashon Hara is really about what words are falling in my mind. It's not the words that I say. In other words, an animal doesn't speak Lashon Hara because an animal just experiences. If you kick the animal, it barks, and if you give the animal a bone, that's it. But a human being, we experience, kicks and bones and a lot. We people throw us bones and people. But why does one person walk into, I had a terrible day? Other person says, oh, it was a good day. They may have had exactly the same experience, but one person perceives certain things, and another person perceives other things, and it's different people. Sometimes it's the same thing. It's not that the person is different, but it's who the other person was. When that person says it to me, I take it as a compliment. But when that person says it to me, I take it as an insult, even though the two people didn't have any different meaning. It's just how I feel about them, and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of Lashon Hara, it's not about what we say, but it's what we're thinking in the first place. And the Torah tells us part of the idea of Lashon Hara is. I heard this on Rabbi Reisman. Actually, my parents go to his shul. He's a very famous rabbi in Brooklyn. And I heard, it's a cassette, to give you an idea how old it is. It was a cassette that was put out by the Chofetz Chaim Heritage Foundation about how to answer shidduch questions. And it's very good. I thought it was very cool. But he says, I remember that he says, they want to know, is he a serious learner? The question, like the boy, I'll say, look, and one time or another, he'll spend 18 hours a day in the studies for the next 10 years. That's not him. It's not what he's cut out to be, but he has all the good. So don't think of it as speaking what you're supposed to is recommended. whenever you learn or to learn it out loud, even if you're learning by yourself, to express the words. I'm not always so good about it, but we certainly do it. That's just a tool. It's, the speech of Torah, when we formulate those words, that's what it is. But it's a spiritual process. So Shavuos is a holiday with a spiritual holiday. It doesn't have props. It only has the spiritual essence of Torah. And as there's a famous Gemara, I think, I don't remember all the ins and outs of it, but essentially the different opinions as to whether I think it talks about Shabbos and Yom Tovim, half for us, half for Hashem. The Shavuos, everyone agrees it's all for us, all for yourself. A total holiday of indulgence. Right? Ironic, but I think they explain it that way. That it's so spiritual and Torah is so important that we should totally go out and celebrating the Torah because it's high level and it deserves to be celebrated. Rabbi Edelman told me something interesting. He said that I think the name maybe of more than one of the great rabbis of Eretz Yisrael that they were not fans of Jewish artwork that depicts Har Sinai, although it's obviously a popular theme. That I created some artwork like that myself. But he says because the idea is that even though there's nothing wrong with the idea that Torah describes, there's a mountain, people stood around the mountain, there's thunder and lightning. I mean, you can't depict the presence of Hashem, not the Sistine Chapel, but the idea that you're just portraying what the Torah says, what can be wrong? So he said because it was a spiritual experience. And there's an insight that I feel like, it's kind of something that it takes time. A young person might not understand this as well, I feel. But, it's like people I wish I had a photograph of Rashi, I wish I could have the Rambam's. I don't. If I had a chance to purchase a manuscript of the Rambam, I would love to get one. But the idea is that we the whole point is that these people were more than the physical. We as superficial human beings. So I would be able to at least have a picture. If you met the Rambam, you would be seeing him, but really, you would be experiencing his spirituality. You don't get that from a picture. So it's
like when they say when you go on vacation, you said beautiful.
Right. It's not the sunset, right? It has to be there. That's what it is. So we as human beings, we always gravitate towards the superficial. So Yom, I assume it's going to be about the Yom stuff. You could depict the sea splitting, but even if you had photographed it, it's not it because I feel that way about the yeshiva. Like you can. I remember what it was like with the yeshiva in the old building. There was something there that the new building is much more beautiful, but it wasn't like the old building. But you can't put it. You can't. If you weren't there, you weren't there. But okay. Anyways, so that's it. Let's. Chabad bought it. So initially, they rented it out when they first moved to the new building. They still owned the old building, and then Satmar. There was like a Satmar yeshiva there, and then so Rabbi Ginsburg. I don't know if anyone knows Rabbi Ginsburg. He was the old executive director of the yeshiva. His son is Rabbi Aryeh Ginsburg, who's a pretty well-known rabbi in the 5 towns these days. Rabbi Ginsburg was the old executive director that was and he had he was an old timer. So I remember I think I was standing in the hallway with a friend of mine. It was the new building. He walks over. I guess he was friendly with his friend of mine. He says, Mashiach is coming. You don't believe Mashiach is coming? When Chafetz Chaim and Samar and Chabad all use the same building, Mashiach. They want them all at the same time, though. But I think Chabad still has it. It's still there. It's actually the old Forest Hills Jewish Center, and you could tell because it's in concrete above the entrance in these ornate letters. You have to look, but you see over the entrance, Forest Hills Jewish Center. No, conservative, I think. I mean, Jewish Center is usually conservative. They got it in the 50s, so I think it was yeah, nothing like the old building. Yeah, I'd love to be back there. It was such a dump, but it was like Anatevka. It was such a dump, but such a wonderful. There is a halacha, but there are workarounds. I happen to know of a case which is happening right now of a shul that's being sold by a church. bought by a church. I think they tried very hard, and they got whatever the halachic. There are issues, but I guess I don't know the ins and outs of it. Um, Anyways, okay. When I was Malim Bakodesh, and things can go up and not down. When I was in the Yeshiva Chofetz Chaim in Miami, before they had their building that they built, they were like they were in Miami Beach, or they were they were in North Miami Beach, which was like the from neighborhood. They were just in the 70s on Miami Beach, which was just nowhere. And they had this. There was a shul in the area, like an old shul that was like kind of dwindling. And they had built this church there. There was like a bell tower, like a choir, and they had the yeshiva. It was fine. There was nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I don't know if it was actually a bell, but there was a tower. You could see from the outside, and they were in the Beis Hamikdash. It was like a balcony. It was boarded up, but you could see if you took the boards away, there would have been this big space on this, like a balcony space that was where the choir was supposed to be. Okay. Anyways, I remember somebody said. Dr. Alan Jacob, he's from Miami, but he was, I think, the chairman of the board at some point in the yeshiva. So one of the yeshiva dinners, he got up and said, "What do Montessori schools, schools for the deaf, and non-Orthodox synagogues all have in common?" The answer is they all have large campuses that are currently being taken over by yeshivas. Or from schools. So I think the Chofetz Chaim branch in St. Louis got a very big campus from. I think it was St. Joseph's School for the Deaf. They have a St. Joseph's right there by Elwood. So they have a beautiful campus because basically, in other words, the schools for the deaf became less. And then once you had cochlear implants and other technology and Montessori was, it's a fad. It still exists, but it's not, it's not past its heyday. And then also, basically, it's all these, these create these large institutions that are now available for the use of big yeshivas and other institutions that need them. So, there's a Torah point there, which is that everything is created for the Bnei Israel, and if we do, it says, "Malachta nasef al-yedei achirim." Hashem has other people do the work for us. And Rabelski is saying that, when Mashiach comes, what are they going to be doing in all those skyscrapers in Manhattan? So they're going to be packing lunches to send to the students who are learning at the yeshivas. And, but there's really a Gemara. The Gemara says, in the beginning of Avodah Zarah, it's a famous Gemara that when Mashiach comes, it mentions specifically, this is interesting, I didn't know this, but more recently I actually looked at the Gemara. It mentions specifically the Romans and the Persians, the two nations. But it says that Hashem will say, whoever worked for the furtherance of Torah should come and receive their reward. And the Romans will come, the Persians will come, and each one will say, we built bridges and roads and theaters, and Hashem will say, you built it for yourself. And it goes on and says, that's the same where it says, you're looking on the mitzvah of sukkah, the whole thing. But the question is, and the Yeshiva Chofetz Chaim asked this question, others I think asked the same question, which is, what kind of really, as we say, what's the happening? Are we? If you are writing this just to tell the law and the Hashem into belief that they actually, what plausible explanation do the Romans have for believing that they can convince Hashem that they built the Colosseum for the benefit of Jews learning Torah? The truth is, though, that the bigger question is on Hashem. Hashem should say that to them. What? I just start laughing at them and say, explain to me exactly how I see him. Hashem, if anything, just to validate their claim, and he says, you're right, but you did it for yourselves. And what you see is, the truth is, the argument is absolutely on the contrary. The joke's really honest, because the truth is, all these things are there. As Ramchal says, and Hashem, everything that Hashem produces good, and everything that knows good, what we see as a basically long pathway to get to the ultimate goodness in some way that we may not understand. Because that's all there is in the world, really. And the Rishiv, I think, added another insight. He said, you still have to explain, and Hashem's answer seems to be quite obvious, that there's no way that these nations can claim to have consciously been working for Torah. And he said the answer is like all great truths, once they become evident, nobody can ever envision. You see this in society. Right? Everyone, that's why they're all taking all those statues off pedestals. Oh, they're such bad people because now we decided. Well, nobody else thought it was. You decided that 5 minutes ago, and for hundreds and hundreds of years, everyone thought X, Y, and Z was correct. And now 5 minutes ago, society decided it was incorrect. We got to knock all the statues down because they were bad. People forget very quickly how society is, and maybe tomorrow you'll think it's. But okay, but that's the way society works. When something is true, it seems so obvious. Oh, I always knew this. People do that. So the reality is, these people actually, again, as difficult as it is for us to envision what benefit could possibly be for Torah from these things, once the truth becomes obvious, so they'll have trouble believing that they ever could have thought otherwise. It makes sense, right? We can't see how it could be that way. Once we do see, it will be such a shift for us. We don't see how they could possibly not have seen it, and they'll also themselves begin to believe that we actually, why else would we have done it? I mean, it's so obvious and it's so clear. But I should say, no, sorry, you just decided that. Too late, right? Anyway, I guess let's do a little bit about Shavuos. So how I'm going to do is like this. Okay, so let's take a look at halachos. So it is indeed a short section, basically one page, double-sided page in the Mishnah. So the 50th day of the Omer is Shavuos, right? It almost sounds like a joke that people make in shul. Today is the 50th day, today's the 50th first day. Some people will really, really push the joke for another couple of days until it doesn't become funny anymore. But it's not actually the 50th day. That we only count 49. But we do. It's the 50th day. The first thing the Mishnah says is we wait to begin Ma'ariv until 3 stars are out. Normally on a Shabbos, we can, and we it's quite popular to make early Shabbos, and if anything, it can be a praiseworthy thing to begin Shabbos early, but not on Shavuos because we want. The Torah famously says Sheva Shabbosos Tmilos, 7 complete weeks, and it's very late. But for the men who are staying up all night, it doesn't matter. The men who are staying up all night, they want to start as late as possible because they figure I'm not going to sleep anytime soon. So the longer the meal takes, and the less I have to actually sit in the shul and try to keep. But for everyone else, they have. But anyway, it's a minhag. It's not a strict requirement. You're certainly Yotzei Ma'ariv, do it earlier, and in cases of hardship. But it doesn't have to be so late. Again, you don't have to wait for 72 minutes. It's you have a more lenient opinion, and you can still eat and go to sleep at a fairly reasonable time. But there are people, like I know at the yeshiva, we don't Huntington too because we don't have anybody coming anyways on Friday night. But that throughout the period of the Omer, they don't start doing early Shabbos basically until after Shavuos, because even during the Omer, you don't want to start Shabbos early because if you start Shabbos early, you're cutting into Friday. So the idea is that each day should be complete, and you don't want to add to one day at the expense of the other, even if it's Shabbos. So some people do that. So with Shavuos, it seems like it's more universal. But again, I don't know. It's strictly required. It's a praiseworthy practice. The truth is that on other holidays like Pesach and Sukkot, there's a concern as well. You don't want. There's no specific minhag to start Pesach only at nightfall, but you are supposed to wait till nightfall for the Seder. And similar to Sukkot, you are supposed to wait till nightfall for the Sukkot. These are biblical mitzvahs that you want to make sure you perform them at the proper time. And even on Shabbos, Kiddush on Friday night is the right to consider a biblical mitzvah. At least the mitzvah is a biblical basis. The whole idea of the cup of wine is rabbinic, but as the Shabbos meal, there is a concept of eating your Shabbos on nightfall. So one thing that some people do is, at the very least, they leave a piece of challah make sure that they have some challah after it really is nightfall, which is not so hard to do necessarily, but on a really early Shabbos, you could theoretically bench and be done with your meal and it's still light outside. So so Shavuos, more than any other day, it's the day itself. In all other cases with Pesach and Shavuos, it's a question of doing the relevant mitzvah in the proper time, eating the matzah, eating in the soda. But with the day itself, we don't want to actually end the Omer too early. We want to make sure we get 7 full weeks. I guess if it doesn't say why, but we know the period of the Omer is a period of preparation, counting down or counting up to given the time. Maybe we want to make sure we're really ready to get the Torah because we don't want to jump the gun. But okay, and then he says, the Mishra says, the Zohar mentions that the pious people of old would stay up all night and study Torah, and by today, by now, it's become prevalent practice among most Torah students to do that. It used to be a select few, but now it's pretty commonplace. And it's mentioned in Shulchan Aruch of the Arizal that anyone who stays up all night, but most of all studies Torah, right? It's not that part, is a guarantee that he'll live out the year and no harm will come to that person. And the reason, according to the simple Pshat, he says, that the Jews were sleeping the night before the Torah was given, and they had to be awakened by Hashem to receive the Torah. It says that, and the Torah actually says explicitly, it doesn't say quite all of that, but it does say that Moshe brought the people out of their tents to come encounter Hashem's presence on the mountain. So the Medrash explains that they were a little bit less proactive about getting there, than they should have been, and we need to fix that. So we stay up all night. We don't go to sleep at all. Being up all night comes with its own set of halachic guidelines. But on any day of the year, if a person's ever up all night, if you take an all-night flight or have a sleepless night, the main issue that it prevents is certain brachos. We make daily brachos, obviously, and they're sort of part of davening, but they're not really. They're in the siddur and they're the first segment of shachar. So as we know, those brachos, unlike, let's say, when you actually start davening, you say Baruch She'amar, you basically are locked into a pattern. There's no talking, no interruption until after Shemona Esrei. But with the brachos, are really a disconnected piece. You can say them at home. You can say them 3 hours before davening, and they're really just brachos. Some say you can say them later in the day too. There's discussions about whether, even if you daven already, you can say the brachos at 6 in the evening. Again, depending on which brachos. But not that you want to be in that position. But the point is that brachos they're brachos. Like everything else, they're blessings that acknowledge certain things. That we have different kinds of brachos. We have brachos hanen, and like brachos that we make before we partake of things in this world. So think of brachos on food, or brachos on sweet-smelling things. Like they're almost like it's almost like